solution for ensuring that faster redressal of such issues, or an alternate legal system that can be put in place? Or are there any experiences from any states where they have been able to address this in a much stronger way?
The challenge with food is, for instance, a citizen goes to a health facility only when he's sick. With food, he eats and drinks every single day, more than once. So the scale of what the food sector is way beyond probably any other sector I've worked with, in terms of touching lives on a daily basis. On that scale, what we did try to do was make the food authority accessible through various modes. So people could email, could WhatsApp, could call a helpline which was 24 hours. These facilities were there. There was an immediate sorting. What belonged to the state went to the state. What belonged to the central licensees was dealt at that level. And there was a follow-up. There were some issues which would pertain to a manufacturer or a producer. Those were sent there, and that had to be. So this was a automatic online tracking sort of system. And the effort was that everybody would revert into the system. Having said that, I'd say it really didn't operate in a very big way. People weren't so aware, however much we publicized, that you can WhatsApp, email, or use any social media to contact us and actually put in your complaint. Consumer courts are, of course, there. Again, access to only a limited number of people. But we also took up issues which came up through newspaper reports, etc. The other mechanism was to link the food-based incidents of outbreak or infection or disease with the IDSP. So what would happen in the past was that the health ministry would get input that there was a outbreak of food poisoning or whatever. The health machinery would kick into process, the district machinery would, but the food machinery was never even informed. So with the health ministry, we have tried to integrate this to include food safety officers in the overall monitoring team, so that the information comes in quickly. But this is early days for this yet. And I think it's something that the Act also mandates. It's impossible for us to set up a new IDSP, but for serious events, this would be the solution.
There's a lot of, these street stalls coming up at any point in time. So how was that handled, and the food safety and orientation of those kind of food handlers addressed?
So we took a little inspiration from Singapore, where, I don't know if you're aware, one of the street food vendors is a Michelin-starred chef also. So with municipal authorities, and this is through the food commissioner, but also asking them to involve their urban development department, etc. The municipal commissioners or corporations, we asked them to identify places where there was a cluster of such stalls. And there's always such. In a tourist place, you'll have a cluster of food stalls, or there are street markets which are very popular, like Law Gardens in Ahmedabad, etc. So we organized these into clean street food hubs. These hubs, through a third-party agency, we provided training, capacity building, very basic, just hygiene, etc., all that. Third-party audits and accreditation, and a little bit of support from corporates for, making the carts look standardized and look better, etc. Um, this again was tough for people to do. Coordination across departments is a tough job, and municipal authorities like to, keep their autonomy. But finally, this is beginning to take off. Some of the states, in fact, when the first clean street food hub was notified, etc., the chief minister himself arrived for the inauguration, and there was a lot of photograph and all that. And he then announced in the cabinet that I want a clean street food hub in every single city. So that state took off well, but not all. So that is one cluster initiative. The second is with these small vegetable markets, fruit markets, small meat sellers. We carried out a similar approach. So you'd have a clean fruit and vegetable market, clean market for meat and meat products, fish, etc. They always sold, in small carts, etc. So those kind of clusters were developed. There is another area, for instance, as campuses. On a large campus, academic campus, or industry campus like Infosys, etc., you will find a number of places for eating, either a food court or a canteen, and very often these are not licensed or regulated. So the Eat Right campus approach was another cluster initiative which really took off. We had Infosys, we had IITs, we had a lot of academic campuses that took this on board and did terrific work, actually. Another cluster approach was railway stations. So we have Eat Right railway stations now. I think at least 10, 11 railway stations have now been certified. So this is an ongoing work. But the cluster approach allows us to bring small vendors together to ensure they're trained, that they have been certified, and that means the certification will be renewed over a certain period, not annually, every 2 years, every 3 years, depending on the nature of the business.
One of the other initiative is the reuse of the cooking oil program.
In fact, this is something I should have said right at the beginning when you asked me what were the three big takeaways. One was, and that really is something that I should have said at that point, is that in a resource-constrained environment, the only way to work is through partnerships. So, just about every initiative we took was a partnership approach. RUCO was exactly like that. We worked with the Ministry of Petroleum to look at and they brought on the table the vendors who would convert the used cooking oil into biodiesel, etc. So the failure here was that this was perhaps a lower priority for the Ministry of Petroleum, although they were very, very supportive, both at the ministerial level and the secretary level. But this was a low priority in the scale of things. So they were unable to appoint vendors in every geography. And unless there are people who are collecting it and they're linked up to a processing facility, the offtake is difficult. On the part of the Food Safety Authority, we had already issued a notification notifying that the total polar compounds in cooking oil could not exceed 25%. That's the safe limit. So if you reuse oil beyond the third time, the TPC level will go beyond. And therefore, they was required to dispose it, and there was a regular checking of the oils. So many of the people found their own solutions. And I think that's the way a system works. They knew they would be checked for their used cooking medium or used cooking oil. There were two ways. One is some of the larger chains would keep adding fresh oil, and that normalizes the oil. The others, used cooking oil, which was used many, many times over, found its way to the candle makers and other industry. So I think finally the solution here is going to be, because that really didn't take off, just to make it with the biodiesel manufacturers. The real solution will be to look at the multiple players, soap manufacturers, candle manufacturers, whoever is using oils in their business for whatever purpose, and see if in an organized way they could become collectors or be linked up to a certain geography. I think these will be the ways forward. There's going to be no single solution.
No, definitely. Thanks for being honest, especially in terms of, when things don't work. I think recognizing those issues is a very critical step at the policy level. Ma'am, India aimed to be trans fat free by Jan 2022. So, where are we at that? Have we really achieved it?
We have, and I'm very, very happy to say that. And I think, again, there's an object lesson there. The issue of reducing trans fats started way back in 5 or 6 years ago. So the trans fat levels were notified to be reduced from 5% to 2% gradually over a period of time. Industry got used to the idea, doing it slowly. And finally, it was notified that in 3 years we would come to 2%, then to 1%, and then to 0.2%, which is where you can be trans fat free. So there was a transition given to industry. During COVID, they asked for extra time. But with all that, when we started actually verifying what was the progress achieved in 21, we found substantial compliance even in early 21. So as we moved on through the year, the compliance levels steadily improved, because it was easier for industry to go straight from 2 to 0.2 than to keep bringing those incremental changes any longer, because the date was looming. So it did happen in January, and one of my former colleagues informed me that 100% it is compliant. So that's been a happy story. And I think it's one measure towards improving the health outcomes for Indian consumers.
Ma'am, as we look back, there are a lot of small nudges that you took. It could be, the package labeling, and also, especially in a country like India, where temples and this, the prasad, what we call, you had a program for blissful hygienic offering to God, bhog. I think these are very niche initiative, because that does affect a lot of people. So in that sense, what was the what level of coordination was required, because it did need to connect with multiple stakeholders.
Let me separate out the food labeling issue from all this. Many of the things that you are talking about are part of the Eat Right initiative. There's a sense that people think that Eat Right is only an IEC effort. It's not. Eat Right actually looked at the demand side, the supply side, sustainability issues around food. So the IEC was one piece of it. But the effort to look at these specific areas which were not covered by the Food Act, or were players who were left out of the loop and who still were actually responsible for feeding people, was part of the Eat Right initiative. So there were these initiatives like the Eat Right Campus. Of course, I've already talked about it, the clean street food hubs, the clean and safe vegetable markets, and also Bhog. These were all part of the were and are part of the Eat Right India initiative. On the testing and consumer empowerment, what we actually did was not just by our regular laboratory network, but by introducing mobile uh, food safety vans, which could do primary little simple tests for adulterants, etc., across the country. We started giving these mobile food safety on wheels to states. We started based on the population of the state, 2, 3, 4. At last count, it was over 125, which were already in use in the states. And the idea is that these would be used, you move them to markets, whether it's shopkeepers or consumers, they can come and get something tested, or the van itself, the personnel can pick up a few samples to just test it at the basic level. And we also use it for the training tool. We also use it as a storage place because it's a fully equipped van with all the equipment for lifting samples which could then be processed in the regular laboratory. We introduced what's called a food safety magic box, which went to schools and allowed children to test the same kind of simple adulterants. How do you see the contamination in a milk sample, or whether haldi is pure or not, that kind of thing. We produced a booklet called DART, Detect Adulteration through multiple tests, about 100 small tests that you can do routinely. All these literature, all these books are available online, freely downloadable by anybody, available in multiple languages, as well as the social media. So, Eat Right India was and is a really all stakeholder kind of approach, where the food businesses are involved, where the consumer is involved. He's actually front and center, and the food authority is one of the incidental players. And during many of the activities, the involvement by NCC, by students, by multiple stakeholders, particularly the famous bike rally which went all over the country, has been really, really heartening.
What are the initiative, if you have to pick one, which is very closest to your heart, and what is it that you feel you could have completed, or is there any unfinished agenda which you think it is left to the successor to handle it?
Well, I have to say the FOSCOS system, because getting the food licensing and registration system right and robust, and allowing online payments so people didn't have to shuffle around to various government offices to make payment, and linking that with all the other efforts and strengthening those is something that's dear to me. The lab piece also, because the intention was that we should be able to see how the labs were performing in real time. Getting them to actually upload the reports and was also a challenge, is still a challenge. So that's a continuing piece of work. If I have to say something that needs to be still completed, since I came from the Ministry of Commerce, there was a lot of focus on exports. Very particularly, I'd say that we were concerned to see that the quality of imports into the country must meet at least our standards. There must be some checks and balances. And since India still restricts genetically modified products, what we did was to ask countries who otherwise produce GM products to certify each consignment that it was GM free, and that would be subject to sample checks. So I think the way the system was strengthened, the clearance time for export consignments reduced, there was a lot of effort on building up the import clearance system. to be much more productive, if I may say so, but also serve the objectives of protecting Indian consumers to the extent possible. So I think that was important. There's one other initiative which I think was very important, and perhaps it will need attention also. We set up, and again part of the partnership, an association called NetProFan. NetProFan actually comprises the professional bodies, associations of Indian Medical Association, IMA, the Indian Dietetics Association, food analysts, nutrition societies, and chefs. These are all stakeholders in public health, in the sense that people come to them for various purposes, particularly to doctors. We need them to speak the language of safe, healthy eating and diet management. So this has been a fantastic experience. There are chapters now in every single state, every single major state at least. A few small states are still left. And some of them are they've taken a life of their own. So in Maharashtra, for instance, they pushed on Ruko, they did Eat Right Melas, they did all kinds of things. And I think the wonderful part is that we are only peripherally required for this, because it's become their own. But what we do is to try and standardize the messages, make available information that is factually correct, because even the best professionals may be misled by some inaccurate information. So I think that NetProFan's activities and pushing it to really greater heights is something that needs to be pursued. Eat Right India incidentally got the Rockefeller Vision Award in 21. And that was for some of these public-facing initiatives. The World Bank has also written a fairly decent case study on this as an effort to ensure compliance on a scale with the engagement of all the stakeholders. So I think these have been exciting things. The advantage really was that I had outstanding CEOs and colleagues. They brought their own genius to this whole enterprise, and I think it was a wonderful time.
Thanks for taking out the time and sharing your thoughts and perspective on this initiative. Thank you, ma'am.